Hello, welcome folks. We are allowing folks together. We'll start here in a couple minutes. Andrew at Bonfyre, Lauren at Cohen Leadership Group on with you. We'll start off formally here in a couple minutes. We'll get started in about 30 seconds, folks, allowing some time for participants to join, then we'll kick off. Okay, welcome everyone. Appreciate you joining. We're excited to welcome Lauren Cohen. She's founder of Cohen Leadership Group. She brings over 2 decades of experience helping organizations strengthen leadership effectiveness, navigate transformation, and build cultures that actually drive performance. Through her group, she's partnered with executives and leadership teams across industries to align strategy, leadership behavior, and culture, especially during complex change initiatives. So she develops leaders who can lead with clarity and adaptability in fast evolving environments. Today, she's going to share what it really takes to prepare leaders and your culture for AI. So adoption doesn't stall and your organization can fully realize its impact. As we go here, feel free to add questions in the Q&A. We'll get to as many as we can at the end. And we'll also share a recorded version of this after the webinar. So with that, Lauren, grateful to have you with us. Thanks for joining, and you can take it away.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to you and the Bonfyre team for having me. I'm really excited to be here to talk about this topic, which is, I think, on everyone's mind. Today's conversation really is centered on one core idea, which is that really most organizations are approaching AI as a technology initiative, but what we're seeing in practice is that AI is actually functioning as a leadership stress test. The organizations that struggle the most AI are often not struggling because of the technology itself. They're struggling because AI exposes gaps in leadership, alignment, clarity, communication, capability. These gaps already existed inside the system, but AI is shining a light on them. They're no longer as easy to avoid or to ignore. So today we're going to talk about what actually creates an AI-ready culture and why leadership maturity comes first. Just to give you a little sense of where we're headed, we're going to talk first about what leadership debt is and why so many AI initiatives stall, how leadership debt quietly grows inside of organizations. Then we'll talk about how AI exposes leadership debt. And then we'll get to the leadership maturity that's really required to build an AI-ready organization, including a real-life case study of a distributed workforce navigating AI adoption. So, as I said before, this is really so much bigger than technology. This is really about a transforming workplace, right? The way that we work is transforming nearly in every sense. So whether organizations are ready or not, that is what's happening. The World Economic Forum actually estimates massive disruption in the coming years. They say that up to 87 million jobs will be displaced. And then on the flip side, up to 97 million jobs will be created as a result of AI. The point really is not about fear. There's a lot of fear surrounding that shift, but it's really that organizations are operating in a much different environment and landscape than we were before. The pace of change, of ambiguity and pressure is really accelerated. And so again, this isn't simply a technology evolution, it's a workforce evolution. Roles are changing, expectations are changing, the pace of decision making is changing, and the organizations that will gain the greatest advantage are not necessarily the ones with the most advanced technology. They're the ones that can adapt the fastest, culturally, operationally, and from a leadership perspective. However, we know that many organizations that are trying to navigate change were built for a very different kind of environment. So, this data is one of the clearest indications that there's a real gap here. This is from the McKinsey Global Survey last year. It says 78% of organizations are using AI in at least one business function, but only 1% of executives describe their rollout as mature. So we know that most organizations are experimenting with AI in some forms. What we see quite often is that organizations have sort of power users in one functional group or another, and then those power users are getting people that they work with to use those tools to make their work more efficiently. But in terms of broad scale rollout of AI, those rollouts are still very, very immature on the whole. And again, the issue really isn't interest. I think everyone's interested in AI, everyone's talking about it, or if you're not, you should be. The issue really is organizational readiness. So, in that sense, although the greatest fear people talk about is losing jobs, I think that the real risk isn't that AI will take people's jobs, is that leaders will fail to guide people through AI driven change. So, here are some of the ways that AI is exposing broken systems that already exist. And again, AI is not creating these fractures, it's just exposing them. So, starting at the top, we're seeing a lot of executive misalignment. So, even being able to answer big questions like how does AI fit with our business objectives? How is AI aligned with our long term strategy and long term vision? Even if when I say long term, I'm really talking like 1 to 3 years, because I think right now that's really about as far as you can plan ahead with things changing so quickly. We see a lot of slow and inconsistent decision making. So leaders really struggling to align on priorities and risk, including the pace of rollouts. Managers below are unclear, right? And so because they're expected to lead a broad scale change, but they don't fully understand it, they're really not empowered to explain the why when people are asking big questions. That lack of clarity really has a real impact on the front line. So you'll see over here, fear and resistance at the front line is really growing. That's where we see most of that fear living. People asking questions like, is AI here to help me or is it actually here to replace me? Am I coding myself out of a job? Right. And then without any answer to that question, there's a lot of disengagement, lack of trust, and of course that trickles down and creates a lot of cultural strain. And then this one, communication breakdown. So inconsistent messaging, when you have a lack of clarity coming from the top on why AI, how AI, where AI, right? Then the communication is very inconsistent. And so that fuels a lot of confusion and a lot of chaos. So this is what we call leadership debt. It's what we call leadership debt. And leadership debt really is the hidden liability that accrues inside an organization when growth outpaces maturity. And this is something that is somewhat unrelated to AI in the sense that this exists across organizations in every industry of every size everywhere. And this is something that I think that we really need to normalize, that as companies grow, they accrue leadership debt. And it's really just that gap between their growth and the leadership systems and infrastructure that support that growth. And then what AI does is layer on top of that this added complexity and change, right? And so it exposes this gap even more quickly. So, this is what our model of leadership debt looks like. Everything starts at the top, right? It starts at the top and it trickles its way down. So, you start with a misaligned executive team, and then leaders below that team, senior leaders, managers, lack clarity on strategic objectives and they don't have the skills to lead. So, leaders across the organization lack capacity to lead. And then you've got ineffective communication channels and strategy, and that breeds into an unhealthy culture, right? So, this is just super high level from a bird's eye view, looking from the top down, starting with misalignment and the way that that bleeds into the rest of the organization. And when it's left unaddressed, those symptoms compound over time and they will slow growth and they will impede AI adoption. So just to drill down on this just a little bit in more detail, you've got business growth and then leadership systems that fail to evolve just across the board. That's what we see across organizations. So you've got growing leadership debt, and then AI comes in, right? And if the executive team is not aligned on its big picture strategy, they're not playing out of the same playbook, it's nearly impossible to answer big questions about AI. And then to push those answers down to the next layer of leaders so that they can push down to the managers and onto the front line. And so you could see how these symptoms kind of accrue near the bottom, right? We've got communication breakdowns, execution drag, culture strain, some of the things that I talked about, overwhelmed managers who don't have clarity and aren't able to answer big questions. And so this is where the symptoms appear. And so this is where people tend to want to treat the problem when in fact it starts up here. So this is the shift that we're trying to help leaders really understand. And up until now, organizations, I think for the most part, have been able to sort of clunk their way through these issues. But AI really increases both the pressure and the speed, which exposes these fractures even more. And so this is the cascade that we often see. So for us, the antidote to leadership debt is building leadership maturity. And likewise, building an AI ready culture really depends on building leadership maturity within your organization and across your organization, again, from the top down. So, what we do is we flip this pyramid upside down and we start with building leadership systems that scale from the executive team first. So everything has to start there. And when you have an aligned executive team that has the conditions for success set up for it, from a systemic standpoint, right? Because you can have the most brilliant group of individual executive leaders, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they will come together to lead effectively as a team. So when we have a system around that team with the conditions for success, and they're clear on where they're going and where the organization is going and how to communicate that, and what skills and tools people need to be successful in that kind of environment and the agility to deploy those things, that's when you build leadership maturity, right? That's when you build leadership maturity. So this is for us what that model looks like. And this is how you can build those leadership systems that scale and will help empower an AI ready culture. When these conditions are in place, AI can become a catalyst, but when they're weak, AI really amplifies dysfunction. And one of the places that we see that most is for frontline managers. So we know that frontline managers are 3 times more concerned about the impact of AI compared to their senior counterparts. Why is that? It's because managers are really that translation level between executive strategy and employee experience. So we're really looking to managers to sort of be that translator, right? And when they're not able to translate because what they're getting from executive leadership is not clear, they can't answer the why, they don't understand it themselves, they don't have consistent messaging, it's very, very difficult to sit in that seat. Okay, so I want to talk about what we call the inverted investment problem. So, like I talked about, a lot of the symptoms of leadership debt appear at the manager level and at the culture level, right? So, those are the symptoms where communication is breaking down. There's chaos, there's confusion, there's fear, there's resistance, in particular when it comes to AI, right? And so, what most organizations do is address the symptom right where they see it at the manager and the frontline level. And that looks like companies throwing a lot of money at more AI tools, more technology, more technical training, more communication workshops, culture initiatives. These are the things that we see as sort of the gut reaction to some of the resistance and fear and breakdown and stall that we're seeing across the board. Where companies should invest, again, this is not a technology problem. It's not. We have the tools. We can have all the training in the world, but if we don't have the leadership maturity that's really required to support a successful AI rollout or adoption, then you can have all the technology and tools in the world, but it's just going to create more confusion. So where companies really need to invest to create an AI ready culture is first at the executive team level. We really need to align the executive team on its AI point of view, on its AI philosophy, on its AI governance, on the way that AI connects and aligns with business objectives. How's AI impacting your market? How is it impacting your customers? How is it impacting how you do business? Not just for internal processes, but in every sense of the word, right? So we got to start there. We have to start there. And only then, when you have that clarity, can you create communication strategy, right? Consistent messaging to deploy throughout the organization, change sponsors and change champions. And then can you build the leadership capacity that's really required at every level of the organization to support a big, broad change like AI? And all of that is part of change readiness. So these pieces come first. This comes second. These are sort of, this is table stakes. We know we need all of this. But what we really need to have an integrated AI strategy and for an organization to be truly AI ready, we have to solve this leadership challenge first. So I'm going to share a quick example that I hope will help bring this to life. This was an organization that came to us for some help with an AI rollout. This organization was a distributed service organization with 300 or more locations, including call centers, field-based workforce. They had a very large non-desk frontline population. And the AI initiative that they were rolling out was to start taking AI-based customer service calls. So they were using AI in their call center. They were also using it to summarize those calls, to pull products from their warehouses, and to organize their workflow, to automate workflow. The challenge was that after automating or after piloting several locations, the adoption was low and the resistance was very high. Their go live was approaching very quickly, and they knew they had to shift things really fast for their adoption to succeed. They actually had already engaged 2 consulting firms when they came to us, both of which were not successful in helping them. And they came to us sort of desperate for a partner that would really listen to them. So we launched into motion pretty quickly, and we facilitated an insights to action sprint over an 8-week period of time. So we conducted interviews of leaders, managers, frontline employees, and customers, really trying to understand what's going well and where are things really going off the rails and where are the opportunities to refine what was happening pretty quickly to create a different result when it was time for their go live. So a few patterns emerged for us pretty quickly. At the executive level, we saw that there was a lot of misalignment on the primary purpose of AI. So some people thought that AI was being used as a cost and efficiency lever, while others really saw it as a way to improve customer service. So you can see how these two sort of fundamental philosophical differences was really creating a lot of chaos and confusion and misalignment. And because of that, there was inconsistent messaging that was going on with no shared or consistent narrative on the why behind AI. And that was bleeding down into really every crevice of the organization. At the manager level, leaders were really not equipped then to translate the initiative into clear, confident communication because they weren't receiving that from up above. And so they weren't in a position to really clearly communicate to people, why are we doing this? What are we doing? How are we doing it? And so they were really unprepared to answer very big questions about the project and its impact. And then there was a gap between the intent at the top, which was a little bit separated, right, on those two fronts, and the experience on the front lines. And then managers just there was a sense of sort of passive resistance from managers. They were trying, they were still in it, but there was a passive sense of resistance and almost a resentment that they were really being tasked with the heaviest part of the rollout when they really were not empowered with what they needed to be successful. The frontline level, there was a lot of fear and a lot of uncertainty, and that was growing rapidly. And what I would say is, although this initiative was targeted to call centers around customer service and product and workflow automation, it really started to pervade the rest of the organization because people across the board were hearing about this rollout and also didn't really understand why. They were picking up on the fear and resistance from others in those areas. And it started to create kind of this growing swell of fear and resistance across the culture. In the frontline workers, certainly there was a lot of fear of job loss. There was resistance to the adoption, lack of engagement, and low trust was building as well. And then from a systemic level, communication was super fragmented. It was very inconsistent. At the time, there were really limited mechanisms to gather feedback from each of those tiers of folks and to address those concerns in real time. And so there was just a lot of chaos and a lot of confusion. There was low adoption in their pilot sites, and there was a lot at stake. You know, they were really at risk of losing customer orders. And in this particular industry, there really isn't a ton of customer loyalty, we were told. It's really sort of a matter of like, how quickly can I get the part? I want to be able to call, place my order, and then walk in and get it. And so if you can't do that, I'll go right down the street. So there was a lot at risk for really for botching this rollout. And there was a big appetite for figuring out the root cause of the problem and solving it very quickly. So here's a summary of what we did. We focused on executive team alignment first. So we hosted a strategy session with the executive team and really helped their leaders align on the purpose of AI, really from a high level first. How does AI connect with our organizational vision, our strategic objectives over the next 1 to 3 years? And then really drilling down to how's it going to help you in these call centers and as it relates to customer service? What's the why here? Why this rollout? Why now? And so we really helped them articulate that and get on the same page because they were not initially. We also discussed with them sort of the rollout guardrails. We talked about workforce implications at each of these different levels and created a narrative that leaders would communicate. We also helped them define success. So we clarified what success would look like across several tiers. That means operational outcomes, customer service outcomes, and then employee trust and adoption. In other words, how do we want our employees to feel as we're adopting this technology and rolling it out? And how do we not want them to feel, right? And then we could figure out what does that look like in terms of how we approach this. We also focused on manager readiness. So we equipped managers. This was one of the biggest pieces, but we couldn't have done it without the first two components. We really equipped managers with talking points. So we gave them FAQs. We hosted town halls and forums for executive leaders to be able to explain to them, the clarity that they had gained through this process, and then equipped them with FAQs on paper so that they could really be equipped to answer questions as their frontline people were coming to them asking questions. We gave them conversation guidance. So we did some role playing, like, well, what happens if someone comes and says, am I going to be replaced? What then? How do I respond to that? We also provided support for handling fear and resistance because, again, there was a lot of that at the front line, and really wanted to equip managers to not just answer questions, but also really feel empowered and feel confident to help lead people through change. We also focused a tremendous deal of time on the communication infrastructure. So this is really, really important, especially when rolling out a new technology in a distributed workforce where you've got a lot of workers who are not sitting at a desk reading emails like you and I are every day. So we helped create consistent leadership messaging. We defined a communication cadence. So making sure that people are getting those touch points, because as I'm sure you know, you have to say things again and again and again and again. Research shows up to 7 times for it to really sink in for folks. We also created a two-way feedback loop so that people really felt like they were a part of the conversation and they could share feedback, and that feedback could be addressed in real time so that those adoptions went more smoothly. And we found ways to better reach those frontline employees who were not sitting at a desk checking their email. So what changed is that the executive team really increased their focus and their purpose when it came to this piece of technology, both broadly speaking across the organization and with respect to this specific rollout. The executive team became much more clear on where they were headed and how AI connects to their business objectives overall. That helped enable consistent messaging. So they had one consistent message. They were pushing that down to senior leaders who were pushing it down to managers. As a result of that, managers became stronger and more confident in their ability to help lead through change and steward this change process. And that reduced a lot of fear and confusion. There also became greater trust in leadership communication. And by the way, one important component of this is that the leaders, I think this takes a lot of courage, but the leaders sort of acknowledged once we started rolling out some new communications that, we've been doing a pretty crummy job at this. And we can acknowledge that this is new for us. It's new for everyone. Everyone in the world is trying to grapple with how do we deal with AI. And we just want to acknowledge that we haven't been doing a great job and we're committed to doing better. And that really helps shift for people to become open. And once those new communications started rolling out, it really did garner greater trust in the leadership team. There became an increased willingness to engage with the AI tools. That improved adoption over subsequent pilots. So there were many pilots leading up to the go live, and the go live actually was phased too, just because they had so many locations. But they began to see better consistency across locations and less friction during the rollout. And just one note that I wanted to share from the client, who said, "It was a pleasure partnering with you. Best experience working with consultants we've ever had. We have so much good stuff we've taken forward to support our go live, which happened this past weekend. So far, so good on days 1 and 3. 1 through 3, we have a lot more to complete, but we're getting there thanks to your guidance and support. We appreciate you all." So happy clients are always good. But what I really want to emphasize here is that nothing about the technology changed. Literally nothing about the technology changed. What changed is the leadership system around it. And that's what improved the efficacy of the rollout. That's what made people feel better. It made people feel more engaged. It made people feel more supported. So it really is all about the proof is in the pudding, right? It's all in the leadership system around the technology. So just a few questions that I want you to think about. Um, some questions you might ask with your team are we aligned on why we're adopting AI? Are we aligned on the why? Are we aligned on the where? Where are we adopting it? How are we adopting it? Is there a clear mechanism for communicating one narrative broadly? Do we have a clear mechanism for communicating one narrative broadly? Do managers feel equipped to lead through change? Have we given them the tools and the skills and the messaging to be effective? And are we investing in tools without upgrading the leadership systems? So once you establish these pieces, once you have clarity around this, it really becomes about how do we broadcast this at scale? And so I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to help us understand some ways to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. And you outlined a great set of examples of how an organization may think through the engagement and communication structure around deploying AI programs in a more efficient and effective way. Quickly here, I'll show some examples of what this can look like in practice. And then after that, we can open it up to questions and feel free to place any in the Q&A as we go. But Lauren emphasized the importance of ensuring that the senior leadership is uh, crisply and humbly coming to the organization and communicating their vision around AI and what expectations they have for it. So humanizing that message is very important. So whether it's through the context of leadership videos or messages that come to the broader employee base through town halls and other mechanisms, humanizing that message is very important to ensure that the proper context and support is there. Beyond the senior leadership piece, enabling managers, especially those frontline managers, to carry the message is incredibly important. So giving those managers reminders and tools to help them carry that message to their team, shape that message in a way that's relevant for their team, and do so effectively at scale are very important. So examples here where we might distribute talking points to those managers, making sure they got ready access to them and clear expectations on when and how to share those talking points would be really, really impactful. Lauren also mentioned two-way interaction to ensure that there's feedback coming from the extended team. Some of that feedback can come in the form of gathering insights and best practices. What's going well now that we've launched this? What are you able to do now more effectively than you hadn't before? Can you share that? Can we make that public and visible so everyone is participating in those insights? And then also gathering either or named or confidential feedback through survey mechanisms to ensure that the objectives the initiative is established are being met and employees are coming along for the ride. If you go to the next slide, Lauren, other things that might be important to consider would be ensuring that the behaviors and outcomes that you want to seek are mapped to recognition moments within the organization. So how can we identify the behaviors that we want to see and give public recognition, public visibility to those who are embracing the behaviors that the initiative is calling for? So whether it's through direct use of the AI tools or embracing some of the philosophies or strategies associated with the initiative, making sure that that's visible just carries the momentum of the initiative. And then as it relates to moving middle managers and enabling frontline managers and giving them tools and resources wherever possible, tracking engagement with those managers and seeing who is leaning into the expected behaviors that the organization has set, setting some milestones and metrics around that. So there's visibility on the degree to which managers are leaning in and carrying the messaging and the expected actions and making that visible, at least internally to leadership or perhaps training or HR organizations, or if the culture is right, making that more prominent visually across management teams can help as well. So some quick considerations here as we go. How can you ensure reach and impact when you're deploying engagement and communication plans for these types of programs? Making sure you're reaching employees where they are. So whether it's a channel or a platform or a device that a team is already working inside of, carrying those enablement messages in those platforms are key. And it's very likely that those platforms are not going to be the same for desk-based workers compared to deskless workers, compared to remote or untethered workers. So thinking through the mechanism is really important. Being very clear on expected manager actions. So now that the senior leadership is aligned around an AI program or an initiative, what are those daily and weekly actions that managers are going to be responsible for? How can we track them? How can we celebrate and acknowledge top performers who are leaning in? Showcasing stories around the impact of these initiatives, especially humanizing again what has been achieved as a result of an AI initiative, whether that's through employee spotlights or customer spotlights, making sure that there's a thoughtful, planned cadence of human stories around the program's impact is super important. And then lastly, one thing to consider would be incentives. So if there are a set of behaviors or metrics that an organization wants to drive, whether it's a monetary gift or merchandise or some sort of submission or nomination awards program, think through what are those behaviors that you want to reinforce and how can we incentivize them to drive outsized impact. So with that, that is a view of the case study and some ways in which these touch points can come to life. We'll open it up to questions as you have them. Go ahead and enter. One question that did come up, Lauren, out of curiosity. At that foundational stage when you're engaging leaders in the room and trying to achieve that alignment, take us in the room a little bit, whether it's with this existing organization that you covered in the case study or others. What is it like when you're with that leadership group and trying to reach alignment and consensus? What often is the vibe? What might be some of the challenges in reaching that consensus? Take us in the room and give us a sense of what that process looks like.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's, every organization is a little bit different, right? The DNA of every executive team is a little bit different. The dynamic of every team is a little bit different. So every time it's a little bit different. And what I can say is that, the experience of working in an executive suite is very different from being a manager. It's very different from being on the front line. And so sometimes it's difficult for those folks to really understand what people are experiencing and what people are feeling. Sometimes we call, big changes that happen in organizations will refer to the marathon effect, which is essentially, if you're running a marathon, there's like a big pack of people. There's people at the front, right? And they hear the gun go off or the buzzer go off and they start running. And there's people way at the back that like don't even know that the race has started. And so sometimes, you're just in it. You're in it where you are. And it's very difficult to sort of stop and think about what it must feel like for folks who are way at the back of the pack, who don't even, you've been talking about AI for 6 months, a year, 18 months, 2 years, but there are people who all they hear about is what they see on the news, right? All the layoffs they see on their feed, depending on what generation they're in. They're seeing AI is ruining the world, the environmental impacts of AI, resist AI. And so it's really hard to sort of get in the mind of folks at all different levels of the organization. So that's something that we can help executive leaders sort of tune into, not just as a mindset, but also, we're going out and taking interviews of people, right? We're getting insight from people that they wouldn't necessarily share directly with their executive leaders. And so we're really able to kind of take that and extract that data and share it back. And when we do that, it's very helpful. You start to see the light bulbs go off, which is usually very gratifying and meaningful, right? Because once they are actually hearing how people are feeling, right? And we're making suggestions of how to then address those things. It's a lot easier. Sometimes if a team is like, well, how could they possibly not understand the why? We hear that a lot, right? It's so clear. Well, it's not that clear to them, right? Like it might be clear in your own mind, but actually the person you're sitting across from has a different idea of what that is. And so when we pull that out and then we pull out how confused and afraid people are, then people, I think, start to have a lot more empathy and start to really understand the necessity for creating that really clear, consistent messaging. And that's a big driver of really helping get that executive team on the same page.
Great. And you mentioned interviews as well, the importance of gathering that feedback from every level of the organization. Can you share a little bit about that interview process? Like what are effective ways of gathering that information and maybe some best practices in terms of collecting that really important data?
Yeah. So one thing that we really like to do is we like to understand. I talked about creating success metrics, right? So that was one of the things that we do with this organization. But we really want to understand what are the things that we're trying to change and to drive and ultimately to measure. And so we build interview questions around those things. And we like to ask the same standard set of questions for stakeholders who are similarly situated. So, in other words, we'll ask the same set of questions of every manager that we talk to. We'll ask the same set of questions for every frontline worker that we talk to. And that really helps us synthesize all of the data in a really consistent way so that we're getting a really, a strong set of data that really answers those questions that are designed to move the needle in exactly the ways that we've determined are important.
That's great. Okay, last call for any questions from the team. Go ahead and add them in Q&A if any questions came up from the discussion. I think we are set. Lauren, thank you so much for your time and perspective today. We've got contact information here on the slide for folks who want to find out more about the approach and the experience around leadership development and alignment. Appreciate everyone's time today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone.